We're the Giving Voice spin-off series in which we explore all things male in speech and language therapy. If you've not had the chance to listen to our first bumper episode full of fresh perspectives from our course mates, binge it now. You're listening to Rich
and Cristian.
And today we're talking to quote from a previous article, a real-life unicorn, namely a male speech and language therapist.
We're absolutely delighted to welcome Mr. Mark Campion as our very first guest onto Voice Corner. Mark is a speech and language therapist currently working at a North London hospital trust as part of an adult inpatient team. He's going to be sharing his experience and his thoughts around training and becoming a speech and language therapist as a man. Let's get into it, Rich. Play the music! Mark Campion, welcome to Voice Corner. How are you doing today?
Hello. Yeah, very well. Thank you very much. It's a Friday. Feeling very Friday-ish at the end of January. Thank you very much for having me on.
We are delighted to have you with us. Thank you so much for being here. Before we officially start this interview, I was curious, what was your first reaction to the invitation that we sent you to appear on Voice Corner? Was it a surprise that we were running a Men in SLT podcast?
I don't know why you didn't ask me to come on sooner. Was it a surprise? I guess not really, but it was something I guess in my answer, the justification, I'd say it probably was. At the moment I've just moved and I'm like trying to be like good band 5 newly qualified, listening to podcasts on the travel. And I'm listening to a load of different SLT podcasts at the moment, and when it came up, I was like, oh, speech and language therapy podcast in one, it's the perfect thing. So yeah, I was quite excited when I did hear. But yeah, obviously Men in SLT, as we're going to get onto. But excited to be here. Thank you very much.
And
no worries.
Maybe unfamiliar surroundings with where we're recording, but not unfamiliar to UCL.
No, and I think probably about a year ago, I was sat on the other side of the table, even though it's a circle table. So I did the Changemakers UCL podcast last year, as I was a student last year. Now I've graduated, even though the graduation's in July. And it's the day after my birthday. Don't know how to think about that.
Yeah. And you can listen to that episode on wherever you get your podcast from. That's still on there for the Giving Voice podcast. So check that out when you can. All right, wicked. So I was wondering if you could start us off by just briefly telling us what your current role at your hospital trust is.
Yeah.
Or it entails.
All good. So, my name's Mark. I'm a speech and language therapist, newly qualified, was at UCL until obviously the latest academic year, and I know you two are on that. So I am a newly qualified Band 5 speech and language therapist. I work mainly in the care of the elderly care ward, or care of older people ward, we call it. I work with massive variations of people. We don't sort of stick to our specific wards. We all help each other out in the team and work on different wards. But the majority of the wards that I'm sort of most present on are those. Spend probably, I'd say 70% of my current time working with people with swallowing difficulties, 20% I'd say swallowing and communication, and actually probably only 10% just purely communication, which I know might come to a little bit of a surprise, because when you're going through the course, in terms of like the weighting of what we're learning, we do a lot on communication, and from my experience there are dysphagia, like parts of dysphagia, but when you get dropped into somewhere like the acute, it's expected that there's all this dysphagia knowledge. So that's personally what I really wanted, so I'm really happy with that. And the reason I took the role and applied for it is because I just wanted to get so much of that experience in terms of getting the competencies, and I just really find dysphagia interesting. So yeah, that's kind of my role, that's what I do, and I do some private practice as well, but that's here and there. So
could you tell us a tiny bit more about the private practice? Like, is it in a similar field, like sort of acute adults?
Yeah, so I've had a role for probably since I think it was about a year after I'd become a SLTA. Which I'll tell you more about in history when we get on to sort of how I became a speech and language therapist. Was contacted about picking up some work and changing careers, in later life, I say. But also changing careers is quite a weird thing once you get to part of a career, and then, you sidestep and you go, actually, I want to do something totally different. Sometimes, the NHS works in banding and you have to start at the bottom of the banding and work yourself up. And I was just doing some extra work as well and helping out. And when I got contacted to do some extra work as an SLTA, I thought, what an amazing opportunity and experience. So I've done that probably just over 3 years. That's covered massive varying amounts of ground, a lot of communication, some dysphagia audits as well, but not direct dysphagia experience because I don't have the competencies essentially. But that's what I'm working on at the moment. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Speaking of, like you just mentioned, can you tell us why you wanted to become a speech and language therapist in the first place?
Yeah, what a question. I could give you, I was thinking back and I was like, how far do we want to go back? But I'm going to give you the snap highlights. But so I studied languages, so I studied French and biology, chemistry and physics at A-level. No idea why. Super difficult. Really liked sciences, but found it really tricky. And then I studied languages at university, at undergraduate. Loved it, had a year abroad, absolutely loved communication, talking to people. I got to the end of that degree and I didn't really know how to make that degree become a job that I wanted to do. That was a bit of a tricky point because then I was like, well, I love this communication stuff. I'd started doing student radio as well. And I thought communication, radio, languages, that seems to go in the same direction. Let's carry and go through with that. So I did a lot of radio producing, did a lot of DJing as well at the time. And actually you'd think everyone's a DJ now. I thought everyone was a DJ then, but I was getting bookings. So I was going through the stages of that. I was producing and I was managing a radio station at the time. And I was kind of like, I don't really know where this is going. Started working in hospitality and just the people skills and the communication really appealed to me, but I just didn't like the 80-hour weeks working every single day. That I don't know if I look back on those days and say I don't know how I did it. And anyone working in hospitality, hats off because it's so tricky. Yeah. But I really love the interactions and worked up to the point where the other kind of roles I was doing aren't consistent and weren't regular, whereas hospitality was. And I got to a point I was like, I don't ever see myself working in hospitality management, but here I am. And then that was about 6 years of that, to be honest. And then I started reapplying for roles, looking at other things that I could do, wanted to change up the career as previously mentioned. And before you know it, it was COVID lockdown.
Yeah, of course.
And that came, I think, when you're working 85 or so hour weeks, which is probably not legal, but I won't mention the company. No, I'm joking. Really long weeks anyway. But when you're working that, you just don't get enough time and space to think things through, which might sound silly, but you just don't. So that COVID lockdown, even though it was absolutely terrible for everyone, just gave me that time and space to be like, right, what actually do I want to do? How can I do it? Where do I want to work? There was such a focus put on the NHS at that time as well. Everyone was like, right, how can I help? What can I do? Which I think, from a humanity's sake, is obviously incredibly admirable. Everyone wanted to do things. And I remember looking at, they were like, you could drive people's medications to and that kind of thing. And I thought, that's great, but how can I use my skills and what I can do? And after lots of planning and lots of thinking, I randomly ages ago came to me, not in a dream, but speech and language therapy. And I thought, I wonder what that entails. What actually is that? And then after some planning and some sort of career planning and thinking, I just thought, well, I wasn't really ever aware about speech and language therapy. I don't know if anyone else was. I just didn't know about it, hadn't heard about it. So I started to do some research. Obviously, everyone's got all these days making banana bread and stuff, and I was there tapping away. And there were some online courses that I started to do, just free taster things. And before you know it, I thought, this actually looks quite interesting. I was quite ready to study again. I thought, I went all the way through from school to university, did a 4-year course, and I really needed that educational break. But I thought, right, I'm kind of ready for it. Saw that I could do a master's to add on to the undergraduate, that I'd done. So I just thought this actually could work out. Now I just need to find the part-time role to get me into it. And a friend at the time was he'd kind of done the same thing, but into a sports rehabilitation role. And he was looking for roles, and he managed to see a part-time speech and language therapy assistant role at a hospital trust right near the pub that I was running and living above. And then he messaged me saying, here you go. And I was like, what's this? So I thought, let me give it a go.
Yeah.
Did the interview. I was working part-time at the pub, part-time in the hospital. I think there was one time where I'd served their next of kin in the pub and then saw them in the hospital, which was a lot of explaining, but they really understood. And I just, they knew me actually quite well. And then they were like, they just put two and two together. But as soon as within a couple of weeks, couple of months, I knew that it was for me. I think I needed that for about 4 or 5 weeks. And I just, And then I went up to full time. And then I said, right, I enjoyed it so much. I need to get the degree to be able to, because I was really happy as an assistant, but I knew that I could become a speech and language therapist. And that's what I really wanted to do. And that was that's the goal. Let's go. And here I am.
Brilliant.
But why? I guess that's the big question. I guess that answer was more how. But why is just, I think for me, it enables me to have those loves of communication, those loves of interactions within a context where I'm able to help people. And it's really weird the amount of similarities you can pull from like hospitality to healthcare, but that like bedside manner and that like the interactions that you can have with family members, with people, is just so transferable. And it's just actually just wanting to help people in the best way you can and communicate it really well. And that's what I really enjoy every single day. And also managing to, run a place where you serve 500 Sunday roast dinners, then seeing a lot of people eat and drink. And when you go on wards and start working with dysphagia, it's not dissimilar. So I think that was just other skills that I could bring into it. I'm really happy to help and share and in any way that I can to help improve people's eating, drinking, swallowing and communication. So yeah, I think that's the why.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's so interesting to hear the twists and turns of the path into it. And I thought it was really interesting as well. I don't want to diminish it, but this idea of kind of stumbling into speech and language therapy. Because I would say I totally did the same thing. Cristian, I'm not sure about you.
I didn't know about speech and language therapy before.
Yeah.
And it's only when I was working in that setting where I was working with a speech and language therapist that I became aware of it, and then discovering what they were doing and being like, oh, wow, that's interaction, communication. And you can be trained in that to support people, like you were saying. And then you start thinking about your previous experiences, because I also worked in hospitality for a bit.
Ah, okay.
So then also, and that's a lot about how you interact with people and kind of you are trying to support their needs in that conversation and how they communicate, and you're matching them, and it's going to be different from whoever you talk to. So yeah, it's from serving roast chickens to dysphagia management. It's an interesting path, but I think that's kind of characteristic of the profession, really. So great to hear you talk about that.
It is, and I think there's a lot of things in terms of some of the parts of my role include like IDSI testing. So this week I've been in hospital kitchens testing foods according to like the IDSI auditing. And there's sometimes as well when I'm working in other hospitals and going in just to like see, are these level 5s actually level 5s? And if so, great. And if not, let's give an education, let's run things through. But having that experience of working in kitchens and going into kitchens and like having those interactions, I can share. And I think that's always then met quite well to be like, oh, this isn't just someone has no experience of like hospitality, catering, whatever you want to call it, but someone that's been in a commercial kitchen that kind of knows how it runs, that appreciates it, but just wants to help. So I feel like it just adds to the skills.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So our next question is, what was your training to become a speech and language therapist like?
Yeah, amazing. I think it was really nice. I know that, so I hate to burst the bubble. I had these questions slightly beforehand, but I did have a think about them. I know, but it was, it made me think about what was the training like. And I guess from those first 2 years, because I did 2 years as a speech and language therapy assistant, and from those first 2 years, that's when my training really started. And there were still times where like it was that interim between moving from hospitality that I could have done with my eyes closed, hands tied behind my back. I've just done every single day for the last 7 years, you just knew it, just to go something totally different, that I'd just be like, oh, instead of saying like, what bed number's that person I'll be in? I'll be like, oh yeah, table 3. But yeah, I think working on those wards was so formative for me. And I know it was a bit strange because hospitals in that COVID era weren't like hospitals normally, but that's all I knew. And I really sort of like jumped in head first, let's go, like want to learn as much as I can learn. And the team were incredible in supporting me because they knew I wasn't someone that just comes to work, gets in at 9, leaves at 5, is just here to, do the job. They were like, I'm someone that wants to come in. This is a job that I want to do for the rest of my life. And if I can get any experience, I'll just want to become as good as I can be to help, as much as I can. And that was really, really key in how, I was sort of looked after, pushed a little bit, and they'd really try and help me in ways that, oh, there's this really interesting person, do you want to come with me, and give me the freedom to do that. So that was fantastic. In terms of that was like getting some of the skills and then thinking about the actual education of it. My experience was amazingly positive. I think that having, I was a little bit concerned about like coming back to university after 7 or 8 years not studying, because I graduated in 2014 and then I came back to UCL in 2020. So yeah, it was a little bit, I was quite happy that even though I just missed the application for the year before, there was still some hybrid learnings, whereas all of mine was face-to-face, which I think I'm quite happy that happened. But in terms of like coming, I was like, a little bit nervous. I'm about to study it, looking online, you're like, one of the top 10 universities in the world. And all I'm getting is hearing people saying it's incredibly academic and I was thinking, I haven't written, anything longer than a shopping list in 6 years. But I thought I'm not going to let that scare me. I'd rather see how I get on and then let's have those thoughts then. So I was quite apprehensive and of like my own skills coming into it, but I also knew over the last 2 years I've got the confidence of working within speech and language therapy and the support to know that actually it is something that I can do and I just need to push myself in the academic way. So the training was absolutely fantastic. Like I always liken it to when I spent my year abroad in France. I came back at Christmas and I couldn't speak any French. And I think I always used to say to people, like, it's not just handed to you,
Yeah.
And I think university almost carries that a little bit as well. So like, I think if you're going to jump into studying, you can't just walk through it and then walk out and be like, right, I should know it. It's really about pushing yourself in it. So when I went back out to France, I got a job. I was like, right, I'm only speaking French now. And I came back in September and was like, right, I'm great. I can get by, I can order more than just a croissant, a cup of coffee, know what I mean? Yeah. So I think university, I really tried to push myself on the placements and I still did some work part-time as well, just to try and really upskill, see different things and not say no to opportunities and just go for it, which I think was really helpful. I think as well, it's really interesting because the way the course is split with the first year and the second year, and I knew, I've always wanted to work in the acquired area and mainly with adults in the acute setting, just because that's something that I started with and that's what I absolutely loved. Not that there's areas of speech and language therapy that I won't love, but that's just really where I could see myself.
So just to say that at UCL, in our first year, we work in pediatrics and second year is with adults. And that's not the same at all other universities as well. Yeah. So it is quite a unique experience, but...
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I thought I didn't mention that, but yeah. So the first year was very much like, okay, let's see how this goes. I've got no experience in this in terms of working within the pediatric demographic, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. But as soon as it started to get into the second year, I thought, okay, here we go. Yeah. But still, I think then I was expecting myself to know a lot of things that I just didn't know as well. Mm-hmm. And, the whole course was amazing. Everyone was incredibly supportive. And I think that when you're sat there, I think we had a cohort of about 60. And when you're sat there, there might be one day where it's something that you've done, for years and you really know about. And that's a really nice feeling to be able to share and be able to input. But there's other days when you're sat there and you're like, I don't have a clue. No. And I think that what's really important is every single person under that roof has a really good reason to be there. But that sometimes it's just about learning in between, this person knew a lot about this and I didn't, it's about sharing experiences and understanding a little bit more. And you just apply that on top of the actual learning you're getting. So I think, in terms of the overall experience of the training, really, really enjoyed. I'm very much more like a placement. Drop me in the deep end and I'll come out, with goggles on. But really, really enjoyed it, and I think that it's a little bit strange in a way because you're on that course and you all kind of know the exact job you kind of want to go for almost. So it's not like because it's incredibly vocational, it's quite direct and people are working to get that degree to go back to sort of working where they are. So in a way there can be that reassurance that I'm not sure what I'm going to do after this, because it's it gets you a speech and language, it gets you a degree that enables you to be a speech and language therapist. So loved the training and really felt it was helpful and really I think it was about pushing yourself through the training and putting yourself in positions where you're supported, but you're kind of out of the comfort zone. I always found were the best for me. But everyone works differently. That's it. And it's about understanding yourself, how you work best and communicating that with other people, I think, in terms of whoever's supporting you, tutors and whatnot. So incredibly positive, really enjoyed. Would recommend.
It's so nice hearing someone advocate so much for the role and talking about the course and also clearly your drive to get where you wanted to be. And I was just thinking, wow, I really wish I heard something like this before I went into
absolutely
SLT. I still did it, but it would have been really nice just to hear someone's full journey. So hopefully anyone listening, any budding speech and language therapists will find this quite inspirational.
I hope so. And I didn't there was I think like you just mentioned, I don't think there was anything that I'd seen. It was very much like, YouTube speech and language therapist.
Yes.
But I think even if now today you were to YouTube, speech and language therapist, you're going to get probably someone working in a pediatric role, probably one person, so you're not going to get, there's such variation and interdisciplinary, even if you're just working with adults as well, the variation you can get. So yeah, incredible, but like, and a crazy, amazing, winding journey, but a really enjoyable one. And I don't think there's been many days on that journey that I've thought, I don't know if this is for me. There have been a few, but I think the outweigh is the ones that go, oh no, when you realise, okay, yeah, this is for me.
It's special when that happens.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. And you walk out, smile on your face, and you're like, that's my job. So
yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So our topic for this mini-series, as you know, is this focus on men, male representation in SLT. So I'm just going to start drifting us towards that. So my additional question, you mentioned there was about 60 people in your cohort when you were studying. So we were just wondering, how many of those were male or people who identify as male, and how many of your lecturers or teachers or people that you encountered, were men?
Lecturers, I think there were 2 lecturers that identified as male. That's from knowledge. I was trying to rack my brains and think, but I do think there was only 2 out of what I could probably estimate to be 20-ish off the top of my head. In terms of the cohort, as mentioned, there was 60, and I think from my knowledge there's only 4 people there that identified as male. So try and work out the percentage of that really quickly, but 4 out of 60. So yeah, and I don't know how that's changed over the years, but yeah, from my experience, we had 4 people that identified as males in the course, and around 2 lecturers. So you could say the majority. You could say that. Well, I saw you about to ask a question there.
I was going to ask you: were you aware of how many men there would be or might be on the course when you were thinking of applying?
So, because when I was applying, I was already working as an assistant. And working as an assistant, in the first trust I worked in, we all sort of wore the same uniforms, which are like white polos, the physios, occupational therapists, etc. And every time I walk in the room, I was like, 6 foot guy, someone would be like, physio's here.
Okay.
And obviously, you anecdotally you hear through other people, and haven't really met before someone that's going into speech and language therapy, or you get some comments like that, which were a surprise. I didn't really realise. But no, I wasn't really aware, to be honest, prior to that, and I wasn't aware when I was going into thinking about doing speech and language therapy sort of as a career, that was sort of the landscape.
Yeah. Well, that brings us on to the next question. So as of 2023, 95% of the SLT workforce identified as women. Why do you think there are so few men who go into speech and language therapy?
Big question, isn't it? A big question, and I don't really have an answer, but obviously I've been thinking and trying to put together what my experience of course, which is, it's a really strange conversation, I guess, to be having, because I know that living in a male-dominated world, we're then sat in here having this conversation, and I think that I guess all I can do is share my experience of being a man in a speech and language therapy, and as you've just mentioned, 95% female-dominated profession at the moment, but things could be moving, as we've discussed. So I think it's really difficult to put your finger on exactly why. I think I was looking into some research and some studying. There's one study I read about the view of caregiving, which probably a lot of people have said. I don't know, you've said you've interviewed some people saying caregiving is seen as more of a female role. And some of the studies were saying actually just the structures that are in place are just that women feel more obliged to caregive and men don't feel as obliged. And in that the caregiving roles such as nursing, and I think speech and language therapy to a degree could be seen as a caregiving role, then that's why. Do I agree with that? Possibly. However, I think that one of the main things as well it comes down to is probably awareness of the role, because I think as we've sat around this table or said, none of us really knew about speech and language therapy. So is there anyone out there? Are we seeing any speech and language therapists on, things that we're watching, or is there anything in the media and and I think that what you're kind of thinking when you're trying to study or looking for roles is what kind of things do I want to do? You don't just go, right, want to be here, or right, what's going to give me the most money?
Yeah.
And I think in terms of like the career, thinking about careers and stuff like that, it was never brought up to me. And maybe that might be just a theme that's happening, that's just not being brought up, and people aren't really understanding how they can transfer skills in one area to another area. Because I very much fell into hospitality. No one ever said, oh, you could do this, you could do that. I was just quite good at communicating and could run around for 12 hours a day, which when you're, early 20s actually is happy, happy to do it. But I don't think there's just like one thing. I think it's the awareness. I think that it's just that people don't really know about it, and it's not shouted about how amazing a profession it is. So I think it's that's why it was great to come on this podcast to like shout out about how amazing being a speech and language therapist is, in my opinion. From my experience, I wish I could give you the answer to that, but
no,
it's a long conversation,
and that's what we're exploring with this mini-series. And
yeah.
I think having as many perspectives on that as we can, we can kind of start to piece together some sort of an impression of that. We're not going to land on an exact answer.
No.
Of course, so many factors that come into it, and we've already kind of mentioned some of those in our previous section when we were talking about some of the statistics from our research. I guess you kind of made an interesting point about awareness of it as a profession from a young age, and a big part of kind of rectifying that has been recruitment drives, and we've seen that in other areas, other professions which have typically had or historically had a very high percentage of men working in them as a workforce, for example in STEM and in labouring jobs, and we were talking in the last section about how they've made some improvements in terms of the number of women that they're getting onto courses and into the profession as well. But I wonder, so that's going on with those professions. Why is it still that speech and language therapy, as we've talked about, it's something that addresses the fundamental skills and experiences of human existence, communication and interaction. Why do you think out of all those kind of professions, speech and language therapy doesn't seem to have that?
A good question. I think if, I guess, comparing to those other studies looking at STEM and like the labouring work, for example, I guess it's looking at the amount of workers there are. Because if we think about, I would hazard a guess, not that I know, but I would imagine if you were to look at the amount of people that are working in those roles versus speech and language therapy roles, it'd probably be a lot more. So if I don't know, that could reflect that actually the figures are almost similar. Because actually speech and language therapy, majority of it is, funded via the NHS and then in the private sectors and other sectors as well. So it makes me think, not 100% sure why there's still that disparity. But it also, if we think about who's going to pay for those recruitment drives, and also where's that money coming from? Because if you get, at the moment, I know that anecdotally a lot of trusts might say, staffing, etc. But the NHS is something that's in the news all the time. We're talking about money. Where's the money coming from? And constantly in speech and language therapy, it's about justifying exactly what we do, why we do it, and why, we can be really helpful and important as part of the wider discussion. Whereas in terms of other roles and other jobs, is it something that could be seen as more as like a growing market? Because is speech and language therapy a growing profession? That's the question, I guess. Because those figures, if we're looking at those figures against like labour jobs where we're actually building I don't know, I'm not going to get into that conversation, but you know what I mean. I'm just looking at the size of the workforce and the funding behind it,
of course.
Because then I guess a part of that is looking at speech and language therapy. Obviously people, to do it we have to get a degree, and whether that be undergraduate or postgraduate, which again, funding, money. So it all kind of comes down to like, I don't necessarily see those as barriers, because you have to get the education to be able to do what you need to do, and to be able to work with the demographics of people we work with. And even when you get that degree, you don't just get like, right, pat on the head, you're out to the workforce. You have to do, I hate to break this to you both, but the competencies you have to do, it's just like,
get the tissues out.
It's like PAF part 2, but for life.
Oh, brilliant.
Okay.
We've got that to look forward to.
Newly qualified competencies, dysphagia competencies, and it's just all to ensure that we're doing the best that we can, and we know what we're looking at, why we're looking at it, and how we can help. In terms of going back to that conversation about why are the drives sort of not there, I honestly don't know, but I don't know. I know in terms of like diversity, I think would be one of the best points to be behind that, and say that the more diverse workforces, I think the richer in sort of the workforces are going to be, because we're going to have people with all experiences from all backgrounds, and I think that's an amazing thing. But I don't know if there's always going to be a disparity or if it's something that's going to constantly change. That's a good question.
No, really interesting response there.
Great answers, man. Like, honestly, it was so good.
And it's hard, like with the, you know, why there aren't as many men.
Yeah.
It's
it's
just
tricky.
from your perspective.
Yeah.
Just from your experience as well. That's what.
Yeah, it is tricky, isn't it? But yeah, it's like trying to, I mean, it's like introspective. I thought about it. I was like, well, why? And I was like, well, I just didn't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if I knew about it,
Yeah.
and someone was like, actually, you could do this,
Yeah.
and you could do this degree, and you can still talk, you know, have your communication, talk to people, but also kind of help people with their swallowing. And I'd be like, yeah, sign me up.
Mm-hmm.
If we knew about it, like dentistry or doctors, you know, the same sort of exposure that we had growing up at school, you know, then I feel like more people, and both men and women, would get into it. Because when I found out about it, I was like, why aren't more men like aware of this? Like, why is this not talked about?
Yeah,
as much?
and think about like what on our, I know like TV screens, for example, what apart from the King's Speech, and it's like, well, we don't really see it incredibly often. And I think that nowadays I'm really happy when I see someone with communication difficulties, you like in a TV show, you know, you see something and we see it a lot wider, and I appreciate that now, because I'm like, yeah, like good, because it just opens it up. It's not every single person we're seeing on our silver screens is like typical communicator. So I'm a huge fan of that. But then it's like, in terms of like seeing something like, I don't know, Scrubs, or like, you know, you see the medical shows, you never really see a speech and language therapist.
God, you make a good point. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, you know, I think that sort of goes for like, you know, gender aside. It's like, actually the role itself, are we seeing it anywhere? Do we know about it? There's some amazing things that are coming up in the media and in the news about people, you know, helping people communicate, but still I just don't think we just see enough of it. And it's like, does it need to be more thrown out? Maybe it's one of those things, it's like, it might not be it might actually be in speech and language therapy. Do we need to shout a bit more about what we do? Because, you know, every single speech and language therapist I've ever met does amazing things. And it's like, I know if, you know, we have to have a fly on the wall follow us around, it's like, actually the kind of things we do are worth shouting about. So I think working in our teams ensure that we're like supporting each other, supporting our praises, and actually like, at what point can we then take this and be like, look, this is the kind of stuff we do every day. And if people start to see a bit more of that, go, you know what, like that looks really quite good. And and then, you know, a lot of the time in hospitals, and that's my experience, when people, you know, I speak on the phone with people and say, oh, I'm a speech and language therapist, I went to see your mum. I say, yeah, she speaks fine. And I go, yeah, she does. Yeah. And it's not part of our job, job title, but it is part of our job description. We look at swallowing, and you know, we have basically a script that you say, why are you seeing people for their swallowing? And afterwards, every single person is really thankful, and it's really informative. So yeah, again, awareness of the role, I think, really comes down to that.
That's a really good point. And I'd not thought about like the medical TV shows and how you don't see a speech language therapist or occupational therapist for that matter. Like, you know, kind of.
Or like school show. I don't really, you know, I've only watched like some medical TV shows, but even like shows about schools, I don't know if they show speech and language therapists and that side of things.
Well, I think you make a really good link, as we're talking about men in speech and language therapy, that it is about awareness, just more generally, of the profession and what we do. Because I think the amount of times we've been on placement, or we're just talking to friends and family about, you know, what we're studying and what we're training to become.
The classic,
they have an idea,
is so you help people speak properly,
exactly.
And it's like, no, it's so much. It's such a broad, interesting role, and the lack of understanding generally is incredible. Really, once it becomes a bit clearer to you, it is something you want to shout about and spread.
Exactly, and I think that like we could talk, you know, in terms of like the gender and awareness. I think that is a, you know, huge question. I know that's what this podcast is focusing on as well. But I think the awareness actually probably outweighs a few of the other factors. And I think the awareness of just like what actually speech and language therapy is, because you're right. But then, it's a difficult one, because I think that in terms of like, even now when I've been doing it for quite a few years, just having, even with like family members, they're just like, oh yeah, you know, again, it's just like to do with speech patterns, to do with like stammering, to do with all of those kind of things. It's like, about speaking properly. I'm like, yeah, I kind of do help with that, but there's a lot of other things I do. And again, exactly as you said, it's just about the awareness of what the role covers, which I think could be better shown. And the RCSOT does a great job of that. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I just think it could be out there a bit more.
So Mark, do you think that gender has played a role in any way in the advancement of your career? Even though you've just started out as a speech and language therapist, but you've been in there a couple of months now, and even getting the job, do you think it's played or influenced any of that progress that you've made?
I'd like to think not. And in sort of the preparation and thinking about this, I've spoke to a few people who like sort out all of the applications and job applications and things like that. And in that, I think upon application, people can't see anything about you, any protected characteristic at all. They can only see it if they advance you to the next stage, like for interview, for example. So I'd like to think in terms of the selection and the application, not. I also think that from my experience, there's only been maybe one occasion where someone has had quite a horrendous brain injury, incredibly cognitively impaired, and they were sending in speech and language therapists. The whole team was going in, and for some reason they just started to notice a pattern that the patient was they were getting better outcomes when it was a male therapist, so physio, occupational therapist, and with speech and language therapy. And I think that's probably one of the only times I can say it made a difference. And I hear anecdotally that culturally sometimes people respond better to certain genders. I haven't ever really seen that, but I've just heard it.
Yeah.
But I found that, in that one occasion, I felt like that's probably the one specific occasion that I can recall, which is really difficult because it's someone with a frontal brain injury that just doesn't have certain cognitive behaviours that we'd expect. And I think that's probably one of the only occasions. But in terms of my progression, I've only been qualified for a very short amount of time.
Yeah, of course.
But as you mentioned rightly, I'm in a role that I really enjoy, that I really wanted. And in terms of I guess you can even generalize that to getting onto the course. And do I think that made a difference? And I'd like to think not, because of my experiences going into it. But that's, I guess, what I'm hoping, that I hope it hasn't influenced anything. And that's my experience, I guess, from my perspective.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. This kind of links to the previous question. We were wondering, have you noticed any difference in treatment between males and females? In your professional experience, this can be specifically with speech and language therapy, or maybe other things you've noticed with your work. And we're sort of thinking of maybe pay, progression in the career, employment opportunities, all things like that.
I guess in terms of pay, NHS is very transparent and it's incredibly open. You can just Google what band 5, So I don't think that has ever come into it from my experience. And I think that's one of the good things that's open and honest about the NHS is what part of London are you? What band and what experience are you at? How long have you been at the NHS? And that is all that affects your pay, which regardless of any gender, that's going to be the same. So I don't think in terms of pay that's made a difference. In terms of progression, I've only just started, so I don't think it's changed me. I can't give any experience on that. And employment, I guess that would kind of come back to what I was saying in one of the last questions about when there was one opportunity or one person that had real positive outcomes with male therapists, and that would be only one thing, I guess, by seeing that person more. But it's not really progression in my career, I guess. It's just positive outcomes with patients. In terms of have I noticed a difference? Absolutely never. So in terms of my previous trust that I work in, all other types of work on placements, I've never noticed any difference. I've got nothing but positive things to say. I've always felt really welcomed, and I've always felt that my opinion and my perspective has always been really appreciated. Certain times I've also had the courtesy to be really, really enjoy, and I don't know, is that driven because it is more female-led? I don't know, but I've had an amazing supportive network at all times during speech and language therapy, literally since day one. So much so that when speaking to friends that work in totally different jobs and things like that, people, I have a conversation with a friend the other day and they were saying about work and how difficult things are coming and having difficulty speaking to managers. And I said, oh, you have monthly supervision. And they said, what's that? And I thought, every 4 weeks I have a sit down, when I'm first few months of being a newly qualified therapist every week. Just sit down, have a discussion, how things are going at work, what could be improved, if is there anything that could be done, that should be done, and just taking out a couple of minutes to check in with me and see how I am. And I was like, I'm so lucky that I work in a job where obviously we understand like the pressures of burnout and mental health and having difficulties with like huge caseloads and working really hard and with really difficult people, in really difficult situations, not with difficult people. That sounds terrible. But having that space and time to like share those experiences, and if things are difficult, getting the support for that. So I've only had really, really positive experiences from my experience. I haven't really seen any changes in like how I've been treated in all of those environments. Nothing really kind of comes to mind. Always been treated incredibly the same as everyone else. Always felt like I've been respected in the roles that I've done. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Very, very interesting to hear. Super. I think we've got one more question for you, and this one is inspired by something we read in an article by Jess Folks. It was published in the RCSLT members article area in November 2024, so it's very recent.
Nice.
And she wrote, I vividly remember working with a male aphasia patient and feeling unable to connect with him about topics such as golf, football and cars. Of course, women can love those things too, but the fact is I don't, and neither did my female colleagues at the time. Whereas the instant connection with a female patient who loves watching cookery shows and floristry always felt, admittedly, shamefully, much easier. I was just wondering if you had any experience of maybe building rapport with particular patients as a male SLT.
I mean, it was always on my university paths that building rapport was always the strong point, and it's always my favourite bit. All of the other stuff, no, it's the favourite bit because I think probably from like experience of like, again, things like hospitality and what like that, having those initial contacts with like the initial impression of someone and setting out the expectations of like the conversation of what you're going to do. So like going to someone's bedside and being like, I think that always seems a little bit intimidating. It's always like, oh, like I've got to meet this, you see all these details, their name, all of this, and you don't really know how to put that together. Whereas actually sometimes you get the important information and then just going and having a chat with someone and then just building that rapport, I always find is my favourite part by far. Going back to Jess's point there, a really recent study, which is good. I think I have built rapport with hundreds of people over the last few years, and there are times where like I use football knowledge, and if it's like if I'm trying to build rapport with a patient that's a man, I might then use a bit of either football knowledge or something like that, but actually not all men like football, and that's, at the end of the day. And actually there's some women I've talked to as well that really like, Arsenal scarf on in the hospital bed, that kind of classic. Brilliant. Exactly. Well, not exactly, I'm a Leeds fan, but but that
the irony is that I'm from Leeds and I'm the Arsenal fan.
But also I think my experience of it, I've lived in London almost half my life now since I was 18, I'm not almost 36. So I know London quite well, I'd like to think, and I think it's always quite a nice question when you're starting to get to know someone. Just ask where they're from. Have they always lived there? And before you know it, you can really understand, actually like what this person and what they used to do, the kind of things, the places they've used to be in. And if they're, a lot of sometimes people say, oh, I live down in South London. I'll be like, oh, I used to live in Putney. And they, oh, what Putney, and before you know it, you're not there to be like, this is what I want to do right now. I'll get you having some food and drink. You start off with that, say, this is who I am. This is why I've been asked to come and see you. How are you, first of all, and let's go from there, and then just start to build that rapport. And there are times where I've had, there was one patient with aphasia, big Tottenham fan, and I'd always print out the football games of the weekend, and we'd always mark on it who's going to win, like do our own little predictions, and I'd come in on a Monday, and he'd know I'd come in on the Monday, and we'd go from there, and I think that was really important to him. He also had like no verbal output at one point. Before you know it, he was getting some yes, no. And in the middle of like a really quiet board around all of the medical team, around all of the physios and OTs and everyone around, like huddling around to talk through the patients, I was sat in a room with him, and I just went, come on, he went, you Spurs.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. And that was a real breakthrough.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So that, in terms of like the rapport building with someone that has the same interests, but I think I'm quite interested in a lot of things as well. It's not just like sports, football, and having the ability to talk to someone about their interests and what's important to them. work with quite a few people with an LD background amongst other things, and like doing things like communication passports is a really, really interesting and amazing way to find so much about someone. So I've been doing actually some of that this week, and then getting to know so much about someone. So then joining in with the family and with the patient, just having those conversations and then going, oh, I really like that as well, actually. And then that could be, that could be smaller things like favorite things to eat and drink. It could be things they like doing. And I think you can really, with the rapport building, I think it's really good to be honest, because it's quite see-through. If you're like, oh, I really like crocheting too, and they're like, what's your favorite? And you're like, oh, yeah. But just being honest with someone, being like, you know what, I've always wanted to do crocheting, but I just don't know how to get into it.
You just connect. You can connect with them at that personal level, and that's it.
And then after that, you go, hang on a minute, we're actually here to do something.
Yeah.
And but actually, you just getting someone, explaining, setting their expectations, and I think I've been lucky enough, touch wood, to not have to be in a hospital bed with loads of people visiting me, and I think that it could be really easy to start to lose faith in some, if you're asking for things, not getting them, hundreds of people coming through every day. So it's just taking the time out of my day to make sure that someone feels a bit more comfortable with me before I just jump straight in. And I think that's happened across all genders, and I don't think that it's just because I'm a man I can go speak about football one day, but there's loads of other opportunities and examples of other things you do, which is just sharing, again, your experience with someone else. And really interesting, we didn't actually mention it earlier, but someone asked me the other day, like, oh, if you knew about speech and language therapy, talking about awareness, if you knew, would you have done it from A levels? And I'm like, no. I'd still qualify when I'm a 32-year-old, because I think the experiences that I've gained in the years beforehand have enabled me to be the even newly qualified, but the clinician I am, and to have those rapport building, those interactions with people, because I don't think I would probably be ready for that when I was 18,
is that 20. Personal development, isn't it?
Yeah,
like you've got the professional experience that you gain, and organizational skills, all that, but actually it's how you develop as a person over that time, and having that time to do that and to invest in yourself. So then when you are working with patients and you are meeting them for the first time, building rapport is sort of, you've got those skills, you've got those kind of that experience to do that, and to connect with someone that you might not get just if you were studying it straight from A level. You're learning all the theory. You've got to have that life experience, because that's what I think helps with building those connections.
And those comes up in university, all those interpersonal skills actually are incredibly important to be able to communicate yourself well, but across different registers. So you might one minute be talking to a doctor and you're saying something really quite specific that they've only got probably a couple of minutes to talk about, or you've got next of kin that comes in at bedside that you need to speak to for half an hour, someone that absolutely has no idea about anatomy. You can say, oh, in your esophagus. Someone will be like, wait, what? So you just really need to be able to...
Palatal what?
Exactly. So on the fly, you need to be able to like, oh, right. And, they really do that. I think I couldn't speak more about, in the training, and they're really helpful in being able to like describe one thing in 5 different ways. And I think that really helps being able to like, as a clinician, to note someone and be like, oh, what do you know about swallowing? Someone might be like, well, you swallow and it goes down, that's it. And you're like, cool, so I'm going to give you a little bit more info. And the more someone understands what something like swallowing is, you can understand like the things that work really well that we don't think about, and the things that actually can go wrong. And then it's just about going from there and building. But that again is like, I think you kind of can judge that, and it's those skills to be able to be like, this person has come in, they know absolutely loads, and they're like, oh yeah, my family member had dysphagia after X, or so and so, and you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to go right. There's 2 tubes and you're not going to have those conversations, because someone's going to be like, all right, it's quite belittling. Like I already know all about this. So I think those like interpersonal skills are really, really important as well, and they do help through university, through placements, and through just life experience. Which I guess that comes down to the point I'm making, is that I feel like over the course of my like personal experience of speech and language therapy, I've been really helped with the experience I've got behind it from having previous jobs. So, and
I guess referring back to what Jess Folks was saying in her members article about how building rapport with men was for her a little bit more of a difficult experience than it was for women. But then I guess she would have adapted as a clinician to the patient and to the client, or
for sure.
Loved one, whoever it is. And okay, so she doesn't know much about football, cars, whatever, but she would have found a way, interpersonal skills of building that rapport.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it becomes like, that's where the clinician takes over, and the clinician in that way is like genderless. That's the kind of, you assume that role, and that's what it's all about, adapting and mirroring and meeting that person at their level, I guess. Yeah. And then finding ways to build your unique relationship, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman.
I think that in that way, I think that thinking about it, when these questions came through, I was thinking, well, actually, what if I had a family member? And I don't think the first thing I think is like, the first thing I definitely wouldn't think is gender, I can say you that. The first thing I think is I'd want to ensure that that person has like the best speech and language therapist that they can, that understands them the best, understands the family. And I guess sometimes it's important to remember that if it's something we do every single day and we go and see, 10 people in a day, we might be but actually for that person, if you've got a family member in hospital, it's a really horrible time. If you're in hospital yourself, it's a really horrible time. So we do take time to, explain things and ask if anyone has questions, and also like provide contacts to be like, when I walk out that door, you're going to have 2 questions. I don't know it, but don't have it now, and you can contact me afterwards. Yeah. So just having that slight thought, sort of, let's have a look at the other side of the coin and be like, well, what would I expect? What's, possible within the realms of what we're able to provide as a service? And then actually, I think, coming back to the main thing of the conversation, obviously talking about gender, is that I don't think that comes into it, but actually, like you said, you can build rapport in an entirely like genderless way. You don't need to, but that might help. But actually, you don't need it as it's not a necessity, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
True, but you can pick on things if you want to.
For sure.
If you feel, and if that's going to personally help that patient, that client, then you do it, because you've got to do whatever is going to benefit the client and patient the most. Yeah. So if that's the way round or the way through that, then by all means, absolutely.
And actually, I guess that you just kind of triggered off another idea, is that I know I said earlier, sometimes there was someone that responded better to a male clinician, but actually sometimes as clinicians we need to ensure that we're getting the family involved, if there is a family, not saying there always is, but there's a lot of times where I could work with someone and I'll make sure I phone the family and say like, I'm going to be going at 2:00, should we go there and we'll like do lunch together, all 3 of us? So that kind of thing I think we can bring in, and I think that can help in rapport building. So it's not like one-on-one, like I'm here, I've got a lanyard on, I'm going to talk loads at you. Yeah. So you're there and you're kind of like, think about like kind of like mealtime partner training. So you're there speaking to the next of kin, speaking to the patient, and just like kind of like showing what you're observing, and then being like using them to build rapport. And before you know it, you start to get a sort of 3-person conversation going, and that can be really rich as well. And so it's just another point, can be really helpful. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Excellent stuff.
I really like the focus on more of the human side of all of this, 100%. The personal side, the individual, rather than painting everything by gender, and just looking sort of through that at the actual people we're helping.
That's it.
Well, it's been fantastic talking to you, Mr. Campion. Thank you so much.
Mark Campion, first guest on Boys Corner.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And always happy to speak about it and how amazing the role is and the profession.
Thank you so much for your time.
Always appreciated though.
No, we appreciate you.
Yeah. I appreciate you having me. That's what I meant to say.
And you're official, friend of the podcast now.
Yeah. 100%. Thank you very much, friend of the pod.
Yeah, always. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. We hope to bring out a next episode in this mini-series as soon as we can, so keep an eye out for that. Remember to check our social media platforms, Giving Voice. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, now X. And we'll see you at the next one. Take care, guys.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.